All right, Soundies, welcome to our sound for video session today. Apologies for the technical issues. We did a sound check last night. We did get some issues worked out, but it looks like we're still having some others, and so we had to create this new stream. Apologies for the runaround there. But let's go ahead and dive in and get started. First of all, if you have not already seen it, we do have a podcast. It's called the Learn, Light, and Sound podcast, and we did publish a new episode this week on live streaming. For those that got it early, the wrong file got uploaded, so we're kind of a technical mess, but hopefully the information is useful. We've actually corrected that, so it's available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and then if you any other podcast app that uses one of those will be able to get it as well. So, all right, I'm excited. Today we have Andrew Masters. Andrew was introduced to me by Rob Christiansen. So Rob, if you're here, thank you so much for the introduction. And let's go ahead and bring in Mr. Andrew right now. There we are. Okay, Andrew, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Curtis.
All right. So before we dive in, I've got a variety of questions I want to talk to you about and pick your brain on, but I wanted to see if you would be willing to share with us a little bit of background. How did you get started, A, in music, and B, in recording, engineering, producing, and tell us about your main instrument and what you do there as well.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So I started as a drummer as a kid and several other instruments, but going through high school and different phases in life, decided to start recording myself. I think initially out of like a Digitech guitar pedal headphone output into a Dell, and that's sort of where it started. It grew to a Mackie mixer or Behringer mixer or something, and just trying to squeeze as many channels into that audio input that I could. Eventually I got like a proper interface, and then I think I was 18 when I discovered you could actually get paid to do it. Because I had just been spending money to do it, even for other people. I'm from a small town in Illinois, so there's no market for spending money to record music. It's just like maybe they'll do it if they feel like it, sort of thing. And so I dropped out of, I was going to a community college and dropped out and worked 3 jobs for a year and moved to LA. And I went to a trade school out there for recording called Musicians Institute. And it was a 6-month program, super quick. Did an internship while I was attending, and then I got hired at an amazing studio in Hollywood called East West, which was like a casino in the 1920s, and then like a market, and then Bill Putnam, Frank Sinatra, and Bing Crosby funded it being turned into a proper facility. This legend goes Sinatra was like not feeling working at Capitol Studios because the executives would come down into the studio and sort of like give their 2 cents, and he would be like, well, I'm literally going to build a studio 2 blocks away to avoid this. So yeah, it was an amazing place. A lot of great equipment was designed there. Bill Putnam obviously started Universal Audio, and I think the 1176s were manufactured there, and several other really great legendary pieces of equipment. So they designed amazing recording rooms, tracking rooms, and that's where I started my like actual career, not just recording friends or whatever. And was there for 5 or 6 years, and was lucky to sort of go up the ladder and get to work on amazing records with people that I literally grew up listening to my whole life, and getting to learn from, being in the room and watching people do the thing that you've always like heard the end result is like so special. So yeah, I got to sort of cut my teeth there, and then eventually I decided I wanted a yard and to own something. So my wife and I decided to move on and start fresh. And I've had experience putting studios together countless times, and that's been a really exciting and interesting thing for me because I love DIY stuff, and I love sort of solving problems with as few dollars as possible. So I started, making videos about home studios, and funny enough, one of the things I think we're going to just discuss today, Rupert Neve, I at East West, I obviously there's a tremendous amount of respect for the rooms and the acoustics and just like the whole system of a commercial studio is incredible. But as a engineer and someone who's like just brain works by like how do I solve the problem of like making the sound better, there was definitely a realization like, well, I bet if I had like a few channels of Neves and Neve mic pre's anywhere, I bet you could make it sound pretty good with, a couple baffles and like proper, focused environment. So I really hooked onto the home studio thing, and this was like the first like attempt at really taking the place that I lived and really building it out instead of just hanging panels or whatever, like changing the structure of the room and really going for it. So yeah, I've been working out of my home studio for the past this one for the past year and a half, and I love sharing and making videos about it and talking about sort of those little discoveries I've made along the way, and kind of trying to find a way to communicate that to a broader group of people, because as technical people, sometimes we can kind of get lost in our own language, and everyone else around us is standing by like, what are they talking about? Like, why am I even listening to this? So one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was how can I break something down to the most simplest explanation and then explain it so that like my aunt could get it.
Right.
She's very smart, so she
Good deal. So, and actually on that topic, one thing that you mentioned really intrigued me, and you mentioned, this thought that occurred to you was, well, if I had a few channels of, Neve preamps, couldn't I make that sound amazing everywhere? And let's explore that just a little bit. For those that are not familiar with Rupert Neve, let me just read a one paragraph bio. This is just from Wikipedia. Arthur Rupert Neve was, incidentally, and the reason we're talking about him, he died just recently, within the last couple of weeks here. He was born in 1926, died in February 2021, was a British-American electronics engineer and entrepreneur who was a pioneering designer of professional audio recording equipment. He designed analog recording and audio mixing equipment that was sought after by professional musicians and recording technicians. Some of his customers were music groups The Beatles, Aerosmith, and Nirvana, and recording studios, Sound City Studios and Abbey Road Studios. Companies that he was associated with were Neve Electronics, Focusrite, AMS Neve, and Rupert Neve Designs. And of course, he received a Technical Grammy Award for Lifetime Achievement in 1997. So all that aside, you've worked with some Neve preamps before, it sounds like, and some of his other gear?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in fact, it's something that a lot of the people who watch my videos complain about is like, they'll say like, dude, it seems like you only know about Neves. And it's like, well, the studio I came up on had 5 rooms, but 4 really. And the 2 main rooms that I spent a lot of time in had one of them, the studios were numbered. So Studio 1 was like the scoring room, the big room for the orchestras. That had an 8078 Neve, and it actually had a custom built. It was 2 Neves put in one desk, so there were 80 channels of Neve, 31105 channels, and that's no matter who you are, you just walk in and you see that and you go, "What in the world?" Apparently, that desk was commissioned by Quincy Jones for a Michael Jackson record and wound up at East West. But in Studio 2, they had an 8028, which is like they're both phenomenally well recognized consoles in the audio world. But yeah, I cut my teeth on those and spent 5-6 years learning and using those pre's, and it's pretty obvious when you go from using one of those mic pre's to anything else. And it's not like maybe it wouldn't be fair to say better or worse, but I certainly have a bias. When I put something through there, it's very much like, yes, this is how it should sound.
Mm-hmm.
And prepping for this video, I was listening to Rupert explain a lot of like the circuitry of how, and how they built it and why they made some of the decisions. And I'm not a tech, I'm very much not a tech. It's fine. But from what I understand, they wound up designing their own op amps. So like in the preamp, they're using their own designed op amps, which they didn't start out doing that, but wound up doing that. And then obviously all Class A electronics inside. And from what I understand, it seems like in the channel, the preamp to the equalizer, if there's a compressor or line amp or the VCA or whatever, between each stage, the op amp is customized to what the next module will do and how it will behave. And then on the input and the output, there's a transformer. So that's from what I understand, which is very, very little. That is sort of the magic of what he expects and how he designs channels or audio equipment to sound musical. Like he puts a major emphasis on, we do this because this sounds more musical. And obviously there's a ton of technical other things that I don't understand, but I love listening to. It's quite fascinating to listen to. So yeah, I lean Neve on the pre's, and obviously participating in records that I still listen to that I was lucky enough to work on. There's that bias there, and they never disappoint.
Is there any way, and it didn't occur to me until now, of course, but what would be really interesting to me is to be able to A/B something that is recorded on a Neve pre versus something that is recorded with some other preamp. But if you had to put it into words, are there any words you can think of to? Musical is one.
Yes. Fat with an F, capital F, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
It's very much, it's, you're a drummer, I'm a drummer. The thing that, is the most obvious is if, let's say you take an SSL console, right? SSLs are notoriously well known for mixing. They're amazing mixing consoles. But they just don't have that thing when it comes to recording through them. So recording through an SSL preamp versus through a Neve, either a Neve preamp in like an outboard bucket or through a desk, it's just so different. And you can tell right away, even if you're using the same drums and, the same mics and the same outboard gear, it's pretty obvious. There's just like, it's almost like a dimensional thing where through the Neve, there's just more top and bottom and more weight to it. And from one of the things that I think I understand is with the transformers, and I'm probably wrong, but with the way that the circuitry is designed, that when you go through the microphone preamp on a Neve, you can distort that mic pre, and it's not a bad distortion. Like you don't hear it and you go, "Ooh, that's bad." Whereas most of the time it's pretty clear, like turn it down. With the Neve, you kind of hear it and you go, "I think can we do more of that?" It's almost like you got to be careful because it does sound so good, and maybe, it's just everything has to be appropriate for the project or the song or whatever. But
right, but there's that kind of saturation experience is what I think you're describing, right? It kind of. Yeah, it doesn't hard clip, and it doesn't. Well, most analog circuitry should never hard clip, but there is a different effect there. In fact, That reminds me, if for those who have seen or who have not seen Sound City, the documentary film about that recording studio in the Los Angeles area, um, he's actually featured for a short clip in that video where they interview him and ask him what's the magic of the your preamplifiers, and he starts going off on this pretty technical discussion about saturation and so on and so forth. It's really interesting, though. I didn't understand it entirely, but neither did Dave Grohl, actually, who was doing the interviewing. But good stuff. Okay, let's jump into a little bit, talk a little bit more. So you're a drummer, and when you're placing microphones to record a drum kit, for example, let's start there, because I think it's a good place to start from the standpoint that I feel like, having done a tiny bit of drum recording, that drums are one of the more challenging instruments to record, I think. So when you are going about placing microphones for a drum kit, what's your kind of general process? How do you even start with that? For someone that's never done it before, and you're going to give them a little pep talk on how to go about it, what would you say to them?
Okay, I'm going to frame this through and I'm going to use some puns here. I'm going to frame this through the lens of people listening knowing about shooting video. Okay. Right? So before you go to shoot something, there's hopefully some thought and some idea of what you're going to be doing and how to be prepared for that. So, how many lights you need, how to frame it, what kind of lens you want to use to get the achieved or the desired outcome, right? Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with drums, because there's a million different ways to do it. It really comes down to what do you want it to sound like, because a good drum recording can be 25 different things. And obviously, it goes without saying, great drummer, great drums, in a great sounding room. In school, they called this the good equation or the good formula. You get those three things, it really covers a lot of the ground. Because it's at that point your job as the engineer is to just not screw it up. So we know, everyone who's in the room knows this sounds good. Like, he's got great cymbals, drums, whatever. So then it's just a matter of, do you want it to be a more complex drum recording where you have, let's say, 12 microphones versus a simple setup where you're using, let's say, 3 microphones? Like the Glenn Johns thing is well known on like Led Zeppelin records and a lot of classic rock records, where it's a more open, sort of resonant, very energetic sounding drum recording. Mm-hmm. But there's not a lot of close mics, so you're not getting that focused, rack tom that you can turn up and down, or the hi-hat that you can turn up and down. It's just sort of the kit and 3 mics, which is how it used to be. Well, but now we have whatever we want, which is also fun and problematic. So, it really comes down to, what do you want? If you do want a more complex thing, and I always have to say, this is how I would do it. You can choose however you want to do it. But what I like to do is I like to have sort of a blend, so I can have options. So I, for instance, started doing the Glenn Johns technique with my overhead. So the overheads are sort of like the main picture of the drum sound, right? And then all the close mics are kind of like the details. Like, well, I want more or less of this detail in the kit. So I'll use that technique on my overheads, which is sort of like one directly above the drummer, going straight down at the center of the kit. And then the second mic is actually at a right angle over the the floor tom. So it's a very confusing thing to understand visually, but when you hear it, it sounds really incredible. But then I will close mic some stuff, because I do, maybe I do remote drumming, so I might get hired to do something that they want to sound this way or that way. So if I put the mics up and plug them in, it doesn't hurt the sound. If I want more of a simple thing, I could just mute them. So I will do close mics, and the theory with that is, like, if you're using one mic on, let's say, a snare drum, you're going to it's going to be simpler. Sorry, I have a dog. It's going to be
There's no need to apologize for that.
it,
We're dog people. We love dogs.
it's going to be a simpler process. If you use two mics, obviously, then you're introducing the potential for phase, and then it's just a matter of managing that phase to give you the best sonic view or perspective of what you're recording stereo. So yeah, I mean, there's like a bunch of different mic techniques. This is really like a never-ending sort of point. But yeah, the way I like to do it is sort of decide, do I want it to be this, or do I want it to be this? And then sort of take the steps to get there and be like, do I really need a mic on the top of the tom and the bottom of the tom? Maybe, if it's like a new metal Steve Wilson sort of thing where you just need a ton and just it's like over the top, maybe like a Phil Collins sort of thing. But most of the time I would say keep it simple, pretty much with everything. So yeah, I don't know if that really helps at all. And I will also say with learning audio, the questions you ask, the answers you get are never the answers you want.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
The answers are usually, it depends.
It depends, and people are often unhappy. So I get a lot of, and I'm sure you get this as well. Which mic should I buy?
Yeah.
And honestly, to me, a lot of times the right question that the person that it's asking that question should be asking is, where should I be doing my recording? Or where should I buy my bass traps?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because there's, if they're just recording in a basement room that's completely untreated, that's a sound, and that could be okay for what you want in certain circumstances. But are there going to be a lot of circumstances where you probably don't want that sound? And a bigger bang for your buck is going to be treating that room somehow, as opposed to buying a $500 microphone instead of your $300 microphone.
Yeah, learn how to use what you have first.
Yep.
I think that's a good place to start, because then when you get nicer stuff, you kind of know what to do with it. And and again, I'm going to relate it back to film. Like I'm starting with this $300 lens, and because there's so many limitations that come with it, I've had to learn so much about lighting and about, the functions of my camera and framing and all of the other details, because it's so limiting what I can do. It only lets in so much light. So, when I do get a nice RF L series, it'll be a wonderful thing.
It'll make your life a little easier there for sure. How about, let's talk a little bit about acoustic instruments.
Sure.
What's the process there? If you're going to mic up, let's start with a piano, for example. If you were going to mic up a piano, what would be your general process there?
So again, first I would want to know, like, is this the purpose of recording this piano for, a song? Is that song like a pop song, or is it like a ballad that's just piano and maybe vocals, or maybe just pianos and something else? Because then you sort of know how much of the detail of the piano that you want, and how much you want more of just like the broad general picture of the piano. So once I know, like, let's say it is a pop song and you need it to be able to cut through 90 vocal tracks, then then I would put the mics a lot closer to the hammers and the strings, probably inside of the piano. I would do a stereo mic placement, either like a single microphone that has two capsules with that perfect sort of blum line imaging, so you can kind of just move the whole mic at once, and that's helpful if you can. The best way to do it, or the most fun way, is to have a separate room that the piano's in, and you're listening through the speakers, and you have a friend out there moving the mic that can hear you talking, and you can say, can you raise it up an inch or two, or can you pull it back? And you're hearing those changes in real time, sort of. So that's ideal. And if you're like me in a home studio, that's rare. But yeah, otherwise I would do maybe more of a distant miking technique, like something a pair and sort of just outside of the lid if the lid's open. Also, if it's like it really comes down to, what's the shot, what's the song, is it like a dark scene for a trailer or for a movie, then you might want like a muted pad. And a lot of the decisions also are affected by how the person's going to play. So if they're going to be very soft and it's a very quiet part, then you want to know that when you're miking beforehand. Or if they're going to be like doing a crazy Beethoven sort of thing, then you definitely want to not be so close to overload those capsules. So yeah, it depends, and it's a lot of fun, and it's cool to be able to sort of just experiment and see like what sounds good with whatever else is with it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and it's another one of those things where you'll do it, and then you'll definitely learn what you liked and what you don't like, and what to do and not to do the next time, and then you just continue with that process forever.
Forever until you die, and maybe in heaven too, if you believe in that. Actually, a really interesting question while we're on the topic came in actually from one of our viewers, J.H. Brooks, and it's a really, I think it's a really common question, and I don't know, I didn't actually prepare you for this, so I apologize in advance. It just
Fine.
came in kind of late last night, or I got it late last night. But a thing that I think a lot of us that are in the video world end up having to do at some point or another is, hey, we're having a concert and we need you to record this. So it's going to be a live show. And there are also a million ways you could go about doing that. What would
Yeah.
be your advice on that front?
If there is a sound guy for the live PA and stuff, be friendly. Live sound guys are rough around the edges and high stress and out of work as of the last year. And but I would say, yeah, just get with them and say, what's the best way for me to get the best flexibility post recording? Because there's, as the sound guy, I would say there's like two ways. I can give you a stereo XLR feed that you can stick into your thing, which is not going to be ideal post.
Yep.
You're going to want more flexibility than that later.
Mm-hmm.
And the other alternative would be, probably some sort of sync thing where you can get time code or something with the recording and maybe sync that up with your cameras. I'm not the right guy to be talking about video, audio, post sync stuff, but
Sure.
But yeah, if you could get like stems, as we would call it, and be able to use that, maybe you get the stereo recording and then later get the stems. So at the very least, the stereo recording can be your reference to lock the audio to picture. And then if you can get the stems after the fact, then you could very easily line that up with the stereo, mute the stereo, and then properly get a good sounding mix for picture.
Yeah.
I try to think about it like, if this was put on me, how would I want it to be, so that I could work it out. And that, I think, would make the most sense for me, or be like the best flexibility.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I think that the way you could approach this has changed a little bit in the last few years too. A lot of the live guys, front of house, and, even just the location guys that show up to do a production, a lot of them are using digital mixing boards now, and so they have a lot more flexibility than they used to. I know in the past, for example, they show up with an analog board, and they could give you the mix, that they have created for that space. So they rang out the room, so they know, they've EQ'd everything for that space, and then you get that mix, and it's just not ideal. Because it could sound really, really weird to a recording when you don't have any of the room in there with it.
Right.
And so the nice thing about a lot of those digital mixing boards today is they can actually give you those isolated feeds, first of all, for each channel, if they have enough outputs and you have enough inputs. and you make the arrangements beforehand and everyone's agreed and so on and so forth. But that can give you cleaner, you could just get the isolated, inputs directly from the instruments and the mics on stage. And so that gives you a lot more flexibility. What about if you don't have that flexibility? What if you are just getting literally a stereo feed from the board? They've mixed it for the room. So you've got all this funky EQ on there to prevent feedback. You got the stereo mix. What about room mics? Well, how would you approach that?
If they're already mixed into the stereo, let's say you just have a wave file, right? And the rooms are already in there.
Mm-hmm. Oh well, no. I'm actually thinking. So you you made arrangements ahead of time with the front of house mixer, and they said, okay, all I can really give you is a stereo mix, and it's going to be whatever I'm mixing for the room. So I'm going to have to do some pretty heavy EQ. You get that, but you're welcome to set up some room mics if you want to.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's really only so much that you can do with a stereo mix that's compressed into 2 channels. So I would say that find the best listening environment to work with that audio, and do whatever you can to, whether that's some sort of repair processing or some sort of EQ or something. I mean, there's really not a lot. I mean, this is why I don't ever have any interest in mastering, which is confusing with my name and brand. But yeah, I kind of, it's like what, it kind of is what it is. You can do some shaping somewhat, but otherwise, if you can set up room things to sort of, distract a little bit, that might be useful. But that's a good question. I'm not sure. I would hope to not be in that position.
Yep. Yep. Understood for sure. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about digital audio workstation apps. I know on your channel you had a video some time ago, probably early in 2020, if I remember right, talking about Pro Tools and Logic, at least. If someone is getting started, what's your advice for them in terms of how to choose a digital audio workstation app?
So I would say, obviously, address the budget. Do you want to pay monthly, or would you like to just have something and learn it to sort of understand the process? Mm-hmm. Once you have an answer to that, then that can sort of open or close certain doors. But from my experience, I've spent the most amount of time using Pro Tools, Logic, made by Apple, and then I've recently been using software from Universal Audio called Luna. Pros and cons to everything. I've described my relationship with Pro Tools as an abusive relationship. It's something I keep coming back to, and as soon as I get back there, it's like they're abusing me for ever leaving, and it's it's frustrating. And most of my friends who work in commercial studios will never leave Pro Tools. But it's like when you're working with them, they're just swearing at it the whole time, So, and it's also,
just out of curiosity, are they swearing at it because they're paying monthly, or are they swearing at it because it does things in a certain way, or are they swearing at it because it crashes? Or some of all of the above?
I would say it's a combination of everything, but it's the bugs. It's frustrating because Pro Tools has been around since the 90s, and there's a lot of these things that you would hope would be worked out, and obviously there's some let's say scar tissue from the fact that it's taken them so long to integrate things that have been around for a long time. And it's a combination of things. For me in particularly, I've been using Luna and loving Luna. It's literally a brand new DAW, which is the most amazing thing to me, is that I don't like changing software and okay, let's learn a whole new program to do the thing I already know how to do. But I was able to make that transition seamlessly, and it actually wound up saving me time in my work process, because I use their interfaces and it directly integrates with the interfaces. So like software processing and DSP allocation is all integrated automatically. So there's way less clicking and mousing around. And I love anything that saves me time. So that was really nice, but there's some features they haven't gotten to yet because it's, again, brand new, that Pro Tools does have, which keeps me coming back to those features. And then I get into Pro Tools. And for instance, when I shoot videos, I sometimes will use OBS to record my audio because it's easy to sync up and do a screen recording simultaneously. But sometimes OBS just like doesn't record the audio. And I don't know that until I'm done with the 25-minute tutorial. And I go, oh, cool. Let's do that again. So I on my last video, I did it in Pro Tools and I opened up the track, to record. And I go, okay, well, this one, I'll be good. And of course, it's, had some error 6 minutes in. And I came back and I go, wow, still, can't even just record one track with no processing on it. Amazing. And you can't predict when that happens. So it's like, to answer your initial question, I would say Pro Tools is is commonly used. You can do just about anything in it. Pretty much the same thing with Logic. You can do pretty much anything. The difference is going to be the user experience and the cost. Logic is $200, I think, $200 or $300, one time ever. And it comes with a ton of, what are they called? VSTs. So software instruments and their own plugins. And Apple is very good at Apple. So they make all the stuff that comes with it is really good. And it's very user friendly, which is also another Apple thing. Pro Tools is more like, it's like opening Photoshop for the first time. You're kind of like, I don't know where to start or what is this? And there's a pretty big learning curve, whereas Logic sort of like holds your hand through the process and says, well, do you want to make an EDM song? So, yeah, I would say for like songwriters and like beat makers or producers, Logic or something maybe like Ableton is going to be really conducive for that workflow. For engineers and more, let's say, engineer-minded, like structure, technical people tend to go more Pro Tools. I like using whatever works for the project and whatever's fastest. So knowing sort of the benefits of each, I think, can be useful, but paying for all of them. Luna's free. It comes with the hardware. So if you buy the hardware, you get the software free forever. So that's also a perk.
Yeah. Do you have to be in the Universal Audio ecosystem? Like, do you have to use Universal Audio hardware to use Luna?
Yeah. So you have to have an Apollo, I believe it's an Apollo Thunderbolt interface.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be the Apollo X, but it has to be a Thunderbolt, I believe. I'm probably wrong. People will say it in the chat, I'm sure. But that is sort of like the old school DigiDesign thing where you used to have the 002 and the iLock in order to even open Pro Tools. That's kind of how it is with the Apollo, except now you can just get their little solo interface for $500 that comes with great plugins and a DAW, and it's $500. So to me, I go, well, that seems to make more sense for everyone, I think.
Yeah. Is Luna, just incidentally, because I've actually, every time I go to update my drivers for my Apollo, do you want just the drivers or do you also want Luna? And I'm like, I don't have time for Luna right now. But one of the impressions I got in the initial launch was that it was very much focused on tracking. Is that true, or is it also something you would use for mixing in post, or mixing a song and actually maybe even mastering?
It's phenomenal for tracking and mixing. I would say the downside for me as someone who enjoys doing all of these things is editing. I mean, it's pretty powerful editing, but there's like multi-track editing. So in Pro Tools, they have a tool they made called Beat Detective, where you can take 15 tracks, select 8 bars, and detect the transients, and then choose how you want them to quantize and lock to the grid. And it does all 15 tracks in like 10 seconds if you're really good at it. Luna doesn't have that yet. I'm sure that they will add in and do better versions of all of that, because just from what they have now, it's already so much better than other DAWs that I've used. But yes, it is because I spend a lot of my time tracking, using microphones. I like trying different stuff. The Apollo interface hardware relationship with the Luna software and their plugins is seamless, and it's also, I think they have some marketing term for it. It's like smart or something, where essentially, if with their plugins, they have their own amazing plugins, the unison pre's and the compressors and stuff. So I'll set up console to get my levels. Sometimes I'll throw a compressor on there. Either way, I'm adjusting levels for each track. With Luna, you can use the software in a mode called console tracking mode, on or off. And if it's off, what will happen is you can get those levels in Luna, like your mixer is inside Luna, and it will automatically recall your levels. So if you had drum set up, you had levels and all that stuff there, all you have to do is hit the record enable button, and it recalls all of those plugins, all of those settings and levels. So you can like punch in 2 days later and fix a fill or something, and it takes 0 time. You just press the button once. And since it requires DSP processing, any other plugins you're using in the mix will temporarily bypass while you're in that overdub state. And then as soon as you pull out, it will reallocate everything and go back to how it was, which saves a ton of time. Usually in Pro Tools or Live, you got to flip back and forth between console, bypass everything, flip back and forth, engage it all. And I just don't like spending time on things that don't make. I'm like, this is a waste of time.
Yeah. Pretty sweet. Okay. So so it sounds like maybe Luna's your first choice now if you're working on a project where it's all of the other pieces work okay with that. As you say, it's just your own project or whatever, Luna's your number one choice. And then if you have to, you go to Pro Tools.
Yeah, for the most part, again, it's sort of like the planning thing. If I know, like if I'm producing something from the start, I will do that in Luna because I sort of know what to expect, and when things will or won't work. But for the most part, if I'm producing, like I'm hoping to capture things that are just, you capture it right. You don't really want to go in and repair or fix later. Like you just get it right on the way in as best as you can.
Yeah.
So if you're doing a lot of that or aspire to, it will certainly encourage that, which is great, I think.
Yeah. All right. Let's shift gears again. I want to kind of challenge you a little bit with this next question.
Sure.
If you are working on, let's just say you're doing a music mix, for whatever reason, we're going to limit you to 3 plugins. You can only use 3 plugins. Which 3 plugins do you choose?
Yeah, this is tricky. So my number one go-to plugin is really the 1176 compressor, because there's so much of shaping the sound with everything before you actually record. Again, the environment, the microphone choice, the placement of the microphone, the instrument, where they're sitting, all of that can really be EQ'd or shaped like before it's even captured. And the idea is get it as close as you can before you even capture it. So I would say I always, and obviously I have used Universal Audio, so I love actually the legacy version of it. They have a few different versions. The legacy comes free. So depending on what you choose when you buy your hardware, you will get a pack or some sort of variation of plugins with the hardware. And I got all of the legacy plugins with it. Sorry, 3-year-old. And so I love that. And I would say compressor, EQ, limiter. If there's a 4th, it would be nice to have like a channel with a gate, because doing video, I'm just like, man, I need to gate this like all the time. But for music, I would say compressor, EQ, and limiter. I like the the universal audio stuff, and I like Fab Filter. And I think Fab Filter is pretty reasonable stuff, but it's very, very good. Their limiter is my favorite limiter of all time. The Pro L2, I think, is the most recent one. And that thing is phenomenal for getting whatever your overall mix to the desired level, whether it's for mix, for video, or for mastering. And there's the least amount of compression on the low frequency side, where a lot of limiters will sort of squash that low end. The Pro L2 would be, I'm happy to find a better one. I love when things get better, but I have yet to. And then I would say the Universal Audio 1176. My favorite musical EQ would be the Pultec, the EQ P1A.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Glad you said that, and there's a reason why I'm glad you said that. I wish. So here's the thing: it's a really weird EQ for someone who's never used something like it before.
Yeah.
And what you see is it's a lot. The way a lot of people use it is they're essentially cutting a certain frequency, but they're also boosting in that same area.
Yeah.
Can you explain what's the thinking behind that? Why would you ever want to do something like that?
Yeah. Wow. Definitely I'm not prepared for this question, but it's I would describe it like magic. So for me, it's cool because the EQP1A is like a low frequency and a high frequency. So you can think of it like your car stereo. You got your lows and your highs. And what's cool is we people like to exaggerate things. So we love turning up the high frequencies and we love turning up the low frequencies. I think of the attenuator as sort of like maybe like a parent, like, sure, you can have this, but I'm gonna control some of this so it doesn't get crazy, but you still get the clarity. So I love throwing my high frequency right up to 16K. I'll boost it, and then I'll be like, oh, I love this, but yeah, I should be careful when I love something a lot, and let's attenuate a little bit, which also is very pleasing. You know, you're like, oh, okay, this actually sounds better, safer, and probably more appropriate. And the same thing with the low end. I learned from one of my favorite producers and engineers. He does it on like bass. I'm sure he uses it on a bunch of other things, but with like the bass guitar, he will boost 30 hertz, which is like, I can barely even hear that. Yeah, 30 hertz. And then
down there.
And then also attenuates it. And I was like, kind of what, when I saw and heard that. And then, but also, I listened to all of his records my whole life growing up. So, and realized later in life that he was the common denominator between all those records. And I was like, oh, I like what he does. So, I started incorporating that into my mixes, and it's, again, don't really understand it, but it is really powerful and really fun. I don't think it's good to sort of depend on these things, but they're certainly helpful to supplement if there's a lack of low end or a lack of clarity in the high end. It's a great tool to sort of just enhance it. They're also very broad, so it's not like a parametric EQ where you can go in and get detail. You're not doing any of that with an EQP1A.
Right. And so just for those that are not clear on this, so for example, the Pultec and the 1176 that you're talking about here, Andrew, those are emulations that run within Universal Audio hardware, right? Yeah,
so they are mimicking sort of the vintage versions of those. I think the Pultec, was that made? I don't know who made that. Was that Universal Audio that made that originally?
I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I have no idea. I think it was before. I could be wrong. I was just listening to our friend Rupert there talk about those before he designed his EQs. So they've been around for a long time. Rightfully so.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. So something to look at if you ever have an opportunity. It is interesting how those really seem focused on not so much. I mean, you can solve problems with them. So, for example, if you have a resonant frequency that's just going crazy, I don't know if Pultec is really the right tool for that job. I feel like, in my experience, a Pultec is really about creating textures or kind of tuning the sound just a little bit to really get it where you want it, as opposed to surgically fixing a particular problem.
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. For instance, I would use that on this mic because the SM7 has a naturally uninteresting, dark, sort of, you would say, muddy sound, and then you can apply a roll off to get rid of some of those low frequencies. But yeah, because it's very mid range focused, adding that Pultec can really enhance the clarity, which is great, I think, for like broadcasting and, depending on what you're recording, you might want more or less of that. But it's definitely an enhancer. You're not using this to solve, like to fix problems. You're using it to enhance good qualities.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. All right. Let's see. I think we talked a little bit about what I'm trying to do is kind of tie things back here. You're bringing a great perspective, and the reason I wanted to bring you on were a couple things. Number one, your experience with Neve, mixing consoles, and talk about that. But also, I think for a lot of us that are doing field recording for video and film, and certainly in my case, I didn't grow up in the world. I have some exposure to the world of, going into a studio, working on a music recording, multi-tracking and so on and so forth. My brother has done that for years. And so I've had the chance to go in and do some of that. And that's actually really kind of where I cut my teeth in some respects. But in terms of my own personal experience, most of that's out in the field holding a boom pole with a harness and a sound bag on that. But then, because we know how to do sound, inevitably what happens, and we've talked about this a little already, someone's going to come to us and say, hey, by the way, we need to record this music, or, so-and-so has a violin recital and we need to record this, or, whatever the case may be. And that's where I feel like at least me as a sound for film person, I get really nervous. Like all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't, it's outside of my domain of comfort and expertise. And so I kind of freeze up in some regards. And for example, a couple of years ago, my brother's like, hey, there's this harp player coming over. I heard you got those new Rode TF5s, so Tony Faulkner, these stereo small, pencil condenser mics. And hey, why don't you bring those over and let's record her? And I feel like I really botched that job up. Like I didn't know how to do the mic placement, and I felt, there's this pressure. The musicians there, you got to start tracking. You don't want to have them sitting around forever.
Yeah.
So there's all that kind of, what kind of advice do you have for those of us in the field recording world? How can you kind of soothe our nerves a little bit and kind of give us a little something to go in and feel a little more confident in how to approach those kind of situations?
That's a great question. I feel the exact same way, vice versa, about film. Coming from studios and now doing so many videos and being very humbled with how terrible the audio is, for the videos. Like, wow, I kind of thought I was better at this.
Yeah, well, especially when you put a lav mic on, all bets are out the door.
I know. Yeah, that's a fun challenge. I would say don't overthink it. Try to just, again, the simple solution is usually the best. If you want, and sometimes this can sound silly to say, but it is very true. If you want something to sound closer, move the mic closer. If it sounds too close or too loud, move the mic further away. If you want more of the ambience of the room, put a mic in the room. I mean, it's really, like, we tend to think that it's more complicated than it is, but fundamentally it's pretty, like, it makes sense, especially when you say it like that. You're like, oh, why does my room sound so echoey? It's like, well, because you're in an echoey room. Yeah, like you put a blanket up or something so it's not so echoey. That's usually the word that's used. So it's really kind of keep it simple. If you have, analyze whatever tools you have at your disposal and try to, think like what's the best way to use, the shotgun mic. That's something I would love to get. Actually, there's a a lot of people on YouTube with the great, I think it's the Sennheiser or something like that. I would love to get more shotgun mic experience, but yeah, if it's drums, then, 2 mics is probably better than 1. I would say don't put anything too close to the drums. You know, it's strangely, there's a visual relationship too, I think. Like for me, sometimes, like when I'm placing overheads on the drums and I'm doing a stereo spaced pair thing, I will place them like how I imagine I want to hear them. So for instance, if I want the kick and the snare in the middle of my mix or my recording, my overheads, and I want the toms to kind of go from side to side, well then in my head I go, well, put the mics over the toms and then the kick and the snare are in between those, and when I go from this way to this way, it will naturally do that. And it's and it is amazing. It's so simple, but yeah, there's a little bit of visual thing for me, and it again depends. If you are in a big space, and there's a way to control that big space, and for film, it's really a crazy compromise all the time. Because again, especially with video, if they're like, "Hey, can you get the audio and not mess up our shot?" It's like, no. Or we can just add microphones to the shot, and that would
embrace it. Yeah.
Or shoot it in post and have it be a little corny and a little not quite spot on.
Right. Good stuff. Well, Andrew, thank you so much. This has been super fascinating from my point of view, as again, to bring your experience into this and talk a little bit about some of this stuff here. If people want to learn more, they want to go to the Andrew Masters School of music recording, where do they find you?
You can just look up my YouTube channel. I post hopefully useful videos there occasionally. There's a lot of videos on home studio setups, and I think that is very useful right now, because everyone is sort of transitioning to doing more stuff from home. I saw that coming before there was a world-ending pandemic, and I just worked at a studio, and I was like, the only clients we have are usually clients who also aren't paying the bills. It's somebody else is footing the bill, and this seems unsustainable, So, and I moved to a town where literally every home has an API or a Neve console in the living room, and it's coincidentally worked out to where I can point a camera at their studios and give people ideas on how to use. Hey, do you have $200,000 sitting around? So yeah, the YouTube channel, basically.
Good deal. And then you do some consulting as well, it sounds like. So you andrewmastersmusic.com is another place.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, you can just book Zoom calls. There's mixing, there's stuff on the website. You can check it out if you want. Thank you for having me on this call, by the way. I never get to engage in this technical of a conversation. I really put an effort into making my videos layman friendly, very simple. How can I watch this, and then I press a button, and so this is fun to be able to engage in this sort of detail of the nuanced stuff, and it also seems like a very narrow group of people who are really into it. So it's cool. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming to nerd out with us. We love doing this every Sunday. So if you're game, we'd love to have you back again some other time and talk in more detail about another topic.
Absolutely. What was the name of your podcast, by the way? I want to check that out.
Okay, it's Learn, Light, and Sound.
Learn, Light, and Sound. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep, you bet. All right. Well, for all the soundies out there, thanks so much for joining us, especially with our technical issues up front. It looks like most people ended up finding their way over here. So thanks for joining us. Get out there and make some great sound, and we'll talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody.